Prince died with a body of work worth hundreds of millions of dollars and a house full of it. He built that fortune by refusing to let anyone else own his music, his name, or his image. Now let's go back to where all that money actually came from and what it looked like while he was still alive to spend it. Picture a 65,000 square foot compound sitting on 9 acres outside Minneapolis. White and boxy from the outside, glass pyramids poking out of the roofline, like something dropped from another planet. On September 11, 1987, Prince moved into that compound, and it became the center of everything he owned. This was Paisley Park, and by the time he died, it wasn't just a house. It was a working studio complex with 4 separate studios. A, B, C, and D, with Studio A alone stretching 1,500 square feet, complete with granite walls and isolation booths. It had a soundstage big enough to rehearse full tours on, and acts far outside his own camp, the Beastie Boys, Kool the Gang, Neil Young, and Barry Manilow, all polished their performances on that stage before taking their shows on the road. That soundstage doubled as Party Central. Prince threw what people called Paisley Park after dark bashes there, lavish parties hosted right there on the soundstage, the kind of nights where you might show up, expecting a rehearsal, and leave having watched an impromptu jam session at 2 in the morning. Walk the halls today and you'll find purple walls covered in gold records, photos, and awards from his career. There's a kitchen with a couch where Prince, an avid basketball fan, was known to watch Minnesota Timberwolves games because even a genius who reinvented pop music still wanted to unwind in front of a ball game. And then there were the cars. Tucked into that same soundstage sits a crazy collection of luxury cars, including a baby blue Bentley. Motorcycles too, including the one immortalized on the cover of his most famous album. This wasn't a garage. It was a shrine to a man who could buy anything he wanted and did. The number attached to all of it at the time of his death ran between $200 and $300 million, according to the most widely cited estimates. Some reports pushed back on that. TMZ, citing people close to him, argued his fortune was probably closer to $150 million, pointing to a business empire that TMZ described as chaotic, since he lacked control of his estate and often switched advisors. Either figure puts him in rarefied territory. But here's the thing that made Prince different from almost every other musician sitting on that kind of money. He didn't just earn it from hits, he earned it by owning the machinery behind the hits. Break down what he actually controlled, and you start to see the shape of it. There was NPG Publishing, the entity holding his songwriting copyrights, which court filings later pegged it somewhere between $21 million and $37 million, depending on who was doing the valuing. Comerica Bank on one side, the IRS on the other. There was his writer's share of the catalog itself, valued at $11 million by the bank and $22 million by the IRS. There was NPG Records, his own label, which the two sides valued anywhere from $19.4 million to $46.5 million. And there was the land under Paisley Park itself, 149 acres, of mostly undeveloped ground in Chanhassen, Minnesota, worth $11 to $15 million. Notice the pattern. Almost every major asset on that list is something Prince built, wrote, or recorded himself, sitting inside a company he controlled. That's not an accident. That's the entire story of how a kid from Minneapolis ended up owning a compound, with a Bentley parked next to a soundstage instead of just collecting a paycheck from somebody else's label. He also wasn't shy about spending it, especially in his younger years. One of his early managers described a period where Prince was spending over $100,000 a week, making videos at Paisley Park that meant nothing, footage shot for girls he'd met, with cameramen flown in on a whim. He financed his own films too. Under the Cherry Moon, a movie he starred in and directed, cost $12 million to make, and only grossed $10 million back, a loss he simply absorbed because he could. Building Paisley Park in the first place ran him another $10 million out of pocket, on top of a couple million more pumped into a companion concert film. None of that bankrupted him because the machine kept generating cash whether or not any single project made money. That's what real ownership does. It cushions the flops. And it's worth sitting with that idea for a second, because it's going to explain almost everything else in this story. The contract he signed as a teenager, the word he scrawled across his face in the 90s, the symbol he adopted instead of his own name, and the reason his estate is still worth hundreds of millions of dollars today, even though he's been gone for years. But none of that ownership came easy, and none of it came early. To understand how a black kid from a modest neighborhood in Minneapolis ended up sitting on a compound with 4 recording studios and a fleet of luxury cars, you have to go back to a much smaller room, one with far less purple in it, where a 19-year-old put his signature on a piece of paper that would define and nearly derail the next 2 decades of his life. Long before Paisley Park existed, there was just Prince Rogers Nelson, born in Minneapolis in 1958, raised by 2 musician parents whose influence you can hear in nearly everything he later recorded. Minneapolis in the 1970s wasn't exactly a music industry hub. There was no major label scouting the Twin Cities the way they scouted Los Angeles or New York. So when this teenager started shopping demo tapes around, showing up to auditions able to play virtually every instrument in the room himself, it caught people off guard. He wasn't just a singer looking for a band. He was a one-man operation who happened to also be 16, 17, 18 years old. That self-sufficiency is the detail to hold on to, because it's going to explain every decision he makes for the rest of his career. Most artists at that age need a band, a producer, an arranger, a session musician for the bass line they can't quite play. Prince needed none of that. He could write the song, play the drums, play the guitar, play the keys, sing every part, and then walk into a studio and produce the whole thing himself. That kind of talent gives you leverage in negotiations most teenagers never get to use, and he used it. He signed with Warner Bros. Records in 1977 at 19 years old in a deal reached when he was just 19. It was, by the standards of a teenager with no track record, a remarkable deal. Warner Bros. Gave him something almost unheard of for a new artist: creative control over his own production. The deal gave him a platform to show off his talents as a singer, songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and producer. His first album, For You, came out with him credited for playing nearly every instrument on the record and producing it himself. That was the hook that got him signed. It would also become the exact thing he'd fight to reclaim 15 years later. Here's the piece that mattered more than anyone realized at the time. Like almost every young artist signing with a major label in that era, the contract handed ownership of his master recordings to Warner Bros. The masters, the actual master recordings, stayed with the label. Under long-term contracts he signed when he was just 18, before anyone knew he'd become one of the defining musical figures of his generation. At 19, that clause probably felt like a footnote. He wanted a deal, he wanted a studio, he wanted a way to get his music out. He got all 3. What he gave up was the thing that would end up mattering most. For a while, none of that friction showed. The 1980s turned Prince into a genuine phenomenon. Albums like Dirty Mind and 1999 built his reputation as an artist who could blend funk, rock, and pop into something nobody else was doing. Then came 1984, and the album and film Purple Rain, which didn't just make him famous, it made him enormous. Purple Rain sold over 13 million copies in the US and spent 24 straight weeks at #1 on the Billboard charts, and the accompanying film picked up an Academy Award along with 7 Grammys and a Golden Globe. That's the moment the money really started flowing, and it's the moment Paisley Park stopped being a fantasy and became something he could actually afford to build. But wealth on that scale changes the math of a bad contract. When you're an unknown teenager, a clause about who owns your masters is abstract. When you're the most famous musician on the planet and you realize every record you've ever made technically belongs to somebody else, it stops being abstract fast. Prince kept writing hits for other artists too during this stretch. Songs like Manic Monday for the Bangles, Nothing Compares to You, which became a massive hit for Sinead O'Connor, and The Glamorous Life for Sheila E., proving over and over that he was a songwriting machine, whose output other people were also getting rich off of. Every one of those songs ran through the same publishing structure, the same ownership questions, the same underlying arrangement that had felt fine at 19 and felt increasingly intolerable in his 30s. By the time the late 80s rolled around, Prince had already founded his own imprint, Paisley Park Records, distributed through Warner, giving him a taste of what it felt like to have his name on the label as well as the album. He was releasing prolifically, sometimes multiple albums a year, and that pace itself became a source of tension. Record labels in that era operated on a release cadence, built around market saturation, singles rollouts, radio campaigns spaced months apart. Prince didn't work that way. He wanted material out the moment it was finished. That mismatch, an artist who wanted to flood the market against a label that wanted to ration his output, was quietly setting up one of the ugliest and most public contract fights the music industry had ever seen. By 1992, Warner Bros. Tried to smooth things over with a deal that, on paper, looked historic. The new contract, which included Warner Chappell Music Publishing, covered 6 albums, allowed him to release up to 1 new album a year, came with a $10 million advance per album, and gave him a 25% royalty rate. Reported at the time to be worth as much as $100 million overall, it was framed in the press as one of the richest recording deals ever signed. To an outsider, that looks like a win. To Prince, it missed the entire point. The money was never really the argument. The argument was about who owned the music once it existed, and that 1992 deal did nothing to change that. He'd have all the advances in the world, and still not own a single master tape recorded under Warner Bros.' name. That contradiction, a $100 million deal that still left him feeling owned, is exactly what pushed him toward the most bizarre and radical protest a musician of his stature had ever staged. And it's where the story stops being about talent and starts being about control. On his 35th birthday, June 7, 1993, Prince declared his former self dead and changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol that had first appeared on the cover of his most recent album. No press release could properly explain it, because the symbol itself couldn't even be typed. His press team had to mail floppy disks containing the image out to media outlets just so newspapers could reproduce it. Overnight, the most famous musician in America became known, almost mockingly, as the artist formerly known as Prince, a name so absurd it became a punchline, even as the reasoning behind it was dead serious. The theory behind the name change was legally shaky, but emotionally clear. He erroneously hoped his record contract might not be enforceable if he was, at least titularly, no longer Prince. Warner Bros. Still owned the trademark on the name Prince, so by shedding it entirely, he was trying to draw a hard line between the man and the corporate entity that owned his back catalog. It didn't work as a legal maneuver. The label made clear his obligations under the contract still applied no matter what he called himself, so he shifted tactics from the courtroom to the court of public opinion. That's when the word showed up on his face. Starting in 1994 and continuing for roughly 2 years, Prince appeared in public, on magazine covers, at award shows, on TV, with the word slave written across his cheek. He wore it to the Brit Awards. He wore it on Today in 1996. It wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. When he accepted an award during that stretch, he offered a line that summed up the whole standoff. In concert, he felt perfectly free, but on record, he called himself a slave. The comparison drew real backlash. He was, after all, an extraordinarily wealthy man, invoking one of history's greatest atrocities to describe a recording contract, and plenty of commentators found that comparison offensive on its face. Critics pointed out that someone who'd signed a $100 million contract had a lot of nerve, calling himself a slave, and to them, the money should have settled the argument. But to Prince, the dollar figure was never the point. and he said as much. He later told Rolling Stone that if he couldn't do what he wanted to do, he didn't know what he was, and that when you stop a man from dreaming, he becomes a slave. He added bluntly that he didn't own his own music, and that if you don't own your masters own you. Say what you want about the comparison, the underlying complaint was completely accurate. Every album Prince had recorded for Warner Bros. Up to that point technically belonged to Warner Bros., not to him. He could write it, perform every instrument on it, produce it in his own studio, and sell millions of copies of it and still not legally own the tape it lived on. For a man who'd built a $10 million recording complex specifically so he could control every part of the creative process, discovering that the finished product still wasn't his was the one indignity money couldn't fix. So he started building his own way out. In the summer of 1993, right around the same time as the symbol change, Prince founded his own record label, NPG Records, specifically to reduce his dependency on Warner. It was a hedge, a way to start generating income and distributing music through a structure he actually owned. Even while he was still legally bound to deliver albums to a label he was actively feuding with in public. This is the moment the ownership instinct that had been simmering since he was 19 finally turned into infrastructure. Not just a complaint, a company. The standoff dragged on for years, and Prince eventually fulfilled the letter of his Warner Bros. Contract. The same way you'd pay off a debt you resented. Grudgingly, and with the bare minimum, he delivered a series of albums packed with outtakes and what critics called lackluster material, including releases like Chaos and Disorder and Old Friends for Sale, essentially dumping contractual filler onto the label just to satisfy the album count and get free. His deal with Warner Bros. Officially ended in 2000, and once it did, he went back to simply being Prince again. The symbol retired, the name restored, the point made. What he'd proven, at enormous personal and reputational cost, was that an artist with enough leverage could walk away from even the biggest labels in the world, rather than accept ownership terms he considered unfair. It cost him years of commercial momentum. Some of his 90s output sold worse than his 80s peak, partly because the public fight overshadowed the actual music, and partly because Warner Bros. Wasn't exactly promoting an artist who'd spent 2 years calling them slaveholders in public. But he came out the other side with something almost no musician of his stature had: full ownership of his name, and a functioning label of his own already up and running. The question now was what he'd actually build with that freedom, and whether an independent label run by one of the most famously demanding perfectionists in music could turn creative control into the kind of sustained wealth a major label's marketing machine used to provide. Freed from Warner Bros. By 2000, Prince didn't slow down, he sped up, and he did it on terms nobody else in the industry was even attempting yet. This was years before Spotify, years before the iTunes Store had normalized paying for digital singles, and Prince was already trying to sell music directly to fans over the internet, cutting out labels, retailers, and middlemen entirely. He launched a subscription service where fans could pay a yearly fee and get exclusive access to new material straight from him. It was clunky by today's standards, but the instinct behind it was years ahead of its time. If you own your masters and your name, why would you hand a chunk of every sale to a distributor you don't need? He kept experimenting with distribution in ways that baffled the industry and delighted his fans. In 2007, he gave away an entire album for free, bundled inside a British newspaper, reaching millions of readers who'd never have bought the record in a store, in exchange for a flat fee reportedly worth well over $1 million from the newspaper itself. The music business called it reckless. Prince called it math. He got paid up front, guaranteed, without waiting on royalty statements that could take months or years to trickle in, and that historically shortchanged artists anyway. That same instinct for cutting deals nobody else would take showed up again when he partnered with Jay-Z's fledgling streaming service, Tidal. His album Hit and Run debuted exclusively on Tidal, a deliberate decision meant to send a message about the importance of supporting Black ownership. He wasn't chasing the biggest platform or the most reach. He was choosing the platform run by someone building something independent, the same way he had. He said the deal came at a discount, not because the work was worth less, but because he understood what Jay-Z was trying to do. Ownership, to Prince, wasn't just his own personal cause anymore. By his 50s, he was explicitly framing it as a principle other artists, especially black artists, should be fighting for too. He drew a direct line, publicly, between his old fight and the modern one. In a conversation with a group of black journalists, he compared the muted reaction to Jay-Z's independent streaming push, with the celebration heaped on Taylor Swift for pulling her music off a platform over royalty complaints, framing his own decades-long battle with Warner Bros. As part of a much larger story about who gets credit for standing up to an industry built to extract value from artists rather than share it with them. Touring became another arena where he applied the same logic. Control the experience, control the take. Rather than chase stadium tours that required promoters and third parties eating into profits, Prince booked a residency at London's O2 Arena that became legendary in its own right. 21 consecutive sold-out shows, a run that demonstrated he didn't need a sprawling world tour to generate massive revenue when he could simply plant himself in one building and let the demand come to him. It was, in miniature, the same principle as Paisley Park itself. Build the infrastructure once and let it work for you repeatedly instead of renting somebody else's stage every night. Paisley Park itself kept doubling as more than a home during these years. He hosted the National Association of Black Journalists there for a dance party during their convention, turning his own compound into a venue for cultural conversation as much as music making. He opened the soundstage to other touring acts who wanted to rehearse in a space built by someone who understood exactly what a roadshow needed. Every one of these moves reinforced the same underlying business model. Prince didn't rent access to his own genius. He built the room, owned the room, and invited people in on his terms. None of this made him an easy person to work with, and it didn't erase the financial chaos that had defined parts of his career either. He still burned money on personal indulgences and creative whims the way he always had, funding his own films, financing entire album eras out of pocket if a label wouldn't bite, cycling through managers and advisors at a pace that reportedly left even people close to him uneasy about how organized his business affairs really were behind the scenes. The same TMZ reporting that questioned his eventual net worth described a man who often switched up advisors and lacked the kind of high-power attorneys typically required to handle an estate of that size. He'd spent 2 decades building an ironclad case for creative ownership. He hadn't necessarily built an ironclad system for managing the empire that ownership produced. That gap between an artist who understood exactly how to control his masters and a man who never quite got around to formalizing who'd control everything after he was gone is the detail that's going to define everything that happens next. Because for all his obsession with ownership, for all the contracts he fought, renegotiated, and eventually escaped, there was one document Prince never got around to signing at all. And the absence of that one piece of paper would end up costing his estate more time, more money, and more conflict than Warner Bros. Ever did. By his mid-50s, Prince had spent more than 2 decades proving one point over and over: nobody was going to own his work but him. So in 2014, when he sat back down with the very label he'd once called a slaveholder on national television, it wasn't surrender. It was a negotiation from a position he'd spent his whole career building toward. He signed a new deal with Warner Bros. Records that would see the classic album Purple Rain reissued for its 30th anniversary, alongside a brand new studio album. But the real headline wasn't the reissue. He also regained ownership of master recordings made during his earlier deal with the label, the very masters that had triggered the name change, the word on his face, and the decade-long standoff in the first place. 2 decades after declaring himself a slave to a contract, he walked back into the same building and walked out owning the tapes. It was by any measure a complete victory. The kid who'd signed away his masters at 18 was now at 55. Buying back the very thing that had defined his entire professional identity. He kept working right up until the end, touring, Recording, still famously playing piano-only shows where it was just him and an instrument, stripping away every layer of production to prove he never needed anything but talent and a stage. One of his final performances at Paisley Park's own soundstage was, fittingly, nothing more than him playing chopsticks for a small gathering, a quiet, almost private moment in the same room where he'd once thrown parties for hundreds. Then, in the spring of 2016, it all stopped. Prince died from an accidental overdose of fentanyl, a powerful opioid painkiller, at his Paisley Park estate in Minnesota, at age 57. He was found in an elevator inside the compound he'd built as a sanctuary from the industry that once tried to own him. The world understandably reacted with shock. This was a man who'd spent his whole life projecting control, discipline, and precision, gone suddenly and quietly in the one building that represented everything he'd fought to keep. And then came the discovery that changed everything about how his story would be told after his death. Despite decades spent obsessively controlling every clause of every contract he ever signed, Prince died without a will in place, which was surprising given how careful he'd always been about protecting his intellectual property. And because he had no children and wasn't married at the time, 6 half-siblings were named the legal heirs to his estate. The man who once turned a recording contract dispute into a national conversation about ownership hadn't gotten around to deciding on paper who would own everything he'd built once he was gone. What followed was one of the most complicated celebrity estate battles in music history. The probate case ended up generating more than 2,711 court filings, motions, affidavits, memos, and depositions, as a court-appointed bank tried to manage assets nobody could agree on the value of. Comerica Bank initially valued the estate at $82.3 million, while the IRS came back with an estimate of $163.2 million, a gap of roughly $80 million that took years of negotiation to close. Meanwhile, 3 of the 6 heirs began selling their expectant shares off piece by piece to Primary Wave, an independent music publisher, while the other 3 dug in and fought to keep their stake in the family. It took 6 years in the winter that finally brought resolution. The heirs and the IRS agreed on a final taxable value for the estate, $156 million, closing the gap between the 2 earlier estimates. The court split everything cleanly in 2, one half going to Primary Wave, controlling roughly 42% of the total, and the other half divided among the 3 heirs who'd held onto their shares, alongside 2 longtime advisors who'd fought alongside them. It wasn't the outcome anyone would have chosen, and it certainly wasn't the outcome Prince, of all people, would have designed for his own legacy. A man this fixated on ownership ended up with his life's work divided by a courtroom instead of his own signature. But the story didn't end with the settlement, and here's the part that would have made Prince smirk wherever he ended up. The empire kept growing after he was gone. Paisley Park itself reopened to the public just months after his death, transformed into a museum-style tour operated by the same company that runs Elvis Presley's Graceland, letting fans walk through the studios, see the cars, examine the wardrobe and instruments he'd spent a lifetime collecting. Vault recordings, hundreds of unreleased songs he'd stockpiled in that same building over decades, began surfacing as posthumous albums, deluxe reissues, and box sets, each one adding fresh revenue to an estate that, by some estimates, had grown to over $400 million in value less than a decade after his death, fueled by royalties, licensing, and steady streams of tourists walking through the same halls, where he once hosted parties nobody outside Chanhassen ever heard about. Even his personal belongings kept generating money long after he stopped being able to spend it himself. At a memorabilia auction in New York, his custom-made Yellow Cloud guitar sold for $225,000, well over its original estimate, and an outfit he wore during a New Year's Eve performance at Paisley Park sold for nearly $109,000. Fans weren't just buying memorabilia, they were buying a piece of the same philosophy that had defined his entire career. Proof that everything Prince ever touched, from a guitar to a jumpsuit to a master tape, carried value precisely because he'd never let anyone else claim it as their own while he was alive to stop them. That's the odd, almost poetic contradiction sitting at the center of his story. Here was a man who fought one of the fiercest, strangest, most public battles in music history to make sure nobody but him ever owned his work, who wrote a word on his own face and destroyed his own name rather than let a label keep his masters, and who still, somehow, left the one document undone that would have kept his empire out of a courtroom entirely. He solved ownership. He never quite solved succession. And 6 years, thousands of court filings, and $156 million later, that's the piece of the Prince story most people never hear. Not because it isn't rich, but because right up until the very end, it still was. Master list of references. 1. Celebrity net worth. Prince net worth. 2. Style rave. How Prince will last forever. 3. Finance monthly. Prince's wealth in 2025. 4. IB Times. Prince's money update. Singer's net worth 300 meters report says fortune value inflated. 2,358,956.5. CEO column. Prince net worth. 6. Kartik Ahuja. Prince net worth 7. Hello Magazine. Prince's net worth 10 years later. 897,042. 8. Glam Slam Escape. Prince net worth 2026. Inside his 156-metered estate and music fortune. 9. Countrywide PPL's CNN Money. Who gets Prince's millions? 10. Ebony. Prince's estate reaches settlement. 11. Forbes. The battle for Prince's estate. 2024 117. The battle for Prince's estate, unending conflict, legal drama, and lessons for family business. 12. Billboard, Prince's legal legacy. 13. Rolling Stone, legal battle over Prince's estate ends. 1,285,413. 14. KJWL, Prince's legal legacy. 2026 421. Prince's legal legacy death sparked years-long battle over control of his 156-meters estate. 15. Estate Planning Center. 6 years later, Prince's estate court battle ends. 16. Billboard. Prince estate court battle ends 6 years. 17. Billboard Primary Wave acquires Prince estate share. 9,608,681. Primary Wave acquires Prince's estate share heirs. 18. AOL. The Griot. Estate of Prince finally settled. 11,818,819. American songwriter Prince changing his name to a symbol. 20. Copyright Alliance. The Legacy of Prince. 21. Billboard Inside Prince's career-long battle. 7,348,551.22. Music Legal UK. Prince and the Fight for Masters. 23. Stites Harbison. Prince's trademark cautionary tale. 24. Ultimate Prince. How Prince won his master tapes back. 25. Goldie's Parade. Prince's dispute with Warner Brothers. 26. NPR Remembering Prince on his 60th birthday. 617,799,816.27. BBC. Prince re-signs with Warner Bros. 27,081,344. 28. NBC News. Prince calls for artist freedom. 40,719,191.29. The Root. Inside Prince's Paisley Park Mansion. 2,073,147.30. Minnesota Monthly. Prince's mystique lives on at Paisley Park. 31. The Root. Take a look inside Prince's massive Paisley Park estate. 2,051,366.32. Home Addict. Take a look inside Paisley Park. 33. House Digest. Take a look inside Prince's Paisley Park home. 391,000. 34. Housequake Money Don't Matter Tonight. 35. Deconstructed. Dig If You Will the Picture. 36. Fox News Radio. Paisley Park is hiring, 37. NBC News, auction of Prince's personal items, 875,616.38. Press reader, Daily Mail, £75 to tour Prince's mansion, 20,160,826, 282 trillion, 278 billion, 139,753,634.